Good evening, you're watching Estuary TV News. Coming up, the renewable energy industry makes its mark in Hull with a groundbreaking visit from the Secretary of State. We follow the schedule of a local mayor, and I'll be talking to Paul Litton of Humberside Airport for a review of the regional press. Welcome to Estuary TV News. I'm Hugh Richards. First of all, it's over to James Dunn for the news headline.
Hello, in the headlines today, a fatal collision in East Yorkshire, and North East Lincolnshire Council wants your views on the future. But first, new crime stats released today show a 3% rise in the crime recorded by Humberside Police. Nationally, crime levels stayed fairly static and they fell by 2% in Lincolnshire, according to the most recent figures referring to the year ending September 2014. But in Humberside, they also show a 24% rise in sexual offences, robberies up 20% and a 14% increase in violence against the person. Deputy Chief Constable David Griffin said new measures to put policing in the community should have a positive effect going forward. He also advised people to protect themselves against acquisitive crime. A&E departments in the region continue to underperform. Figures released today show that in the week ending on the 18th, both Northern Lincolnshire and Gaul and Hull and East Yorkshire hospital trusts missed the target to see 95% of A&E patients within 4 hours. Hull and East Yorkshire saw just 77% of patients within 4 hours, which is well below the target and the national average of 89%. Northern Lincolnshire and Gaul hospitals saw 92% of patients in that time, and the percentage has been rising steadily across both trusts. A man has been killed in a crash at Holham, East Yorkshire. Police confirmed that the 45-year-old man from Kingham was pronounced dead at the scene following the accident on the A1033. The car was being driven by a 17-year-old boy who was uninjured. Police are appealing for more information. A Scunthorpe hospital ward has been closed due to an outbreak of norovirus. Ward 2 at Scunthorpe General was closed and patients suffering from diarrhoea and vomiting are advised not to go to the hospital until they've been symptom-free for at least 48 hours. Dr. Peter Cowling, consultant microbiologist, says they'll be reviewing the situation daily. A draft local plan for North East Lincolnshire has now been published for consultation. It marks areas for potential housing and business development and will help shape the borough over the coming decades. It's not scheduled for adoption until 2017, but the council wants people living and working in the area to give their feedback now. That's all from me. Bye for now.
The future has arrived in Hull as the city breaks ground for the renewable energy industry. Yesterday was the first day of construction on Alexandra Dock, with a possibility of decades of wind turbine manufacturing ahead. Richard Morris went along to find out more and to speak to the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, Ed Davey.
We're all enjoying the benefits of the recent oil price drop, but in Hull, people are looking towards the future. Yesterday, Ed Davey MP, the Minister for Energy and Climate Change, officially started construction on Alexandra Dock in the city. The investment is over £300 million, creating about 1,000 full-time jobs and more construction careers while the build is ongoing. We asked Mr Davey if he was worried about the recent drop in oil prices. Would it affect the build?
No, oil doesn't compete with electricity. Oil really goes for transport, for petrol and diesel. Actually, offshore wind competes with things like solar, with coal and gas. And while gas prices have come down a little bit, we're also going to see renewable prices come down. We've seen that in solar, we've seen that in onshore wind, we're going to see that in offshore wind. So I believe if we can be productive, we can be innovative, we can get those costs down. Offshore wind isn't just here for the next few years, it's here for the next few decades.
And obviously we've seen huge investment in energy in this area. What about when we're looking at, education, transport? Are we going to see, that kind of investment matched in those other departments as well?
Well, there's been dramatic increase in low carbon energy and renewables in the last few years. We've seen renewable electricity more than triple nearly triple since 2010, and renewable electricity investment more than double. But that has a follow through to investment in education and investment in transport in order to meet the demands, the skill demands for Siemens and ABP and the other companies that are going to come around here. The schools, the colleges, universities are already getting support, and we're going to see a national college for wind set up here. That's going to bring investment into education too.
And when can Hull be expected to start shipping the new turbines?
Well, we have a construction plan, so there's quite a lot of concrete to be moved and water to be filled in, buildings to be built, plant to be commissioned. So the plan is that by the end of 2016 that we'll have a constructed site that we're able to use. Now, it'll take us a while to get up to full production, but at least by early 2017 you should start seeing turbines on vessels going down the Humber.
Other members of Parliament also expressed their happiness with the investment.
It's a great company coming to a great city, and it's the end of 6 years of very hard work. Siemens were looking at 110 different locations across Northern Europe. They were looking at loads of locations in the UK. Attracting them here was a big plus. Then, of course, we had to, when Hull became their preferred location, there are all kinds of hurdles still to overcome before they signed on the dotted line to go to Alexander Dock. And so now the groundbreaking ceremony means it's going to happen.
I'm joined now by Paul Litton, Commercial Director of Humberside Airport and a member of the board of the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce. We'll be taking a look at the week's local papers in a moment, but Paul, first of all, your reactions to that story about Siemens breaking ground in Hull.
Fantastic news. I think the very important thing for the Humber is to realise that even though this Siemens development takes place in Hull, it has tremendous effects on the South Bank. Dong Energy are going to be the customers for the Siemens turbines. Dong are based in Grimsby, and as an airport we've just had the first helicopter arrive to support that type of activity, the maintenance and operations, in December. So it's great news. And
just talking specifically about the future of the airport and implications for the airport, it's one I use quite a lot, but I'm one of the rare flyers from Humberside Airport who flies as a tourist down to the sun in the Mediterranean. That's not the main part of your business, is it?
No, I mean, tour operations are a very important part still of our airport, but we make no excuse for focusing on industry and supporting the economic activity in the Humber. The 3 times a day KLM service to Amsterdam pushes out in the region of 63,000 people a year across the world. Almost 95% of those people that fly it every day go fully intercontinentally, doing business and bringing back investment and visitors to the region. But 50% of what we do is offshore helicopters. We had over 28,000 aircraft movements last year. Well over 50% was all to do with supporting the gas industry that's based in the southern North Sea. But we're very excited that now with the Siemens announcement, as we've just talked about, the first helicopters arriving to support that, and over the next 3 to 4 years we expect to see 3 or 4 more helicopters looking also to come in to support it.
So are those helicopters flying out to rigs at sea?
Yes.
Or they're flying out and then what, there's sort of a commuter service to Aberdeen and...
Oh, absolutely. Well, what happens is we also have a daily service 4 times a day taking oil and gas workers up in an aircraft up to Aberdeen with Eastern Airways, and that's very successful, a very important part of the local business community.
Sorry to interrupt, but we talk about the north as, and we slightly complain that the south is richer in this country and that everything's very London-based. We're very aware of that up here. It's significant, isn't it, that Humberside is the hub airport that's served by Humberside is Schiphol, not London, not Heathrow.
Indeed, I think actually in the latest figures for 2014 they'll show that Amsterdam was actually a bigger airport than Heathrow in terms of the amount of hub passengers. It's a big and important piece of infrastructure for us, and with this only being a 45-minute flight from our airport across to Amsterdam, an hour and a half wait, and you can literally fly to any point in the world. It's very heavily used, and it's getting busier and it's getting better.
Well, we must move on to the newspapers.
Indeed.
First of all, rather sad series of stories. A tragedy as a boy presumably commits suicide by jumping off the Humber Bridge. A woman's body found in the marina at Hull. That was some time ago, jumping from the bridge. More recently in Hull, and more recently here in Grimsby, with the Grimsby Telegraph, a man found hanged under Cleethorpes Pier, and that only a few days after somebody took their own lives on the railway lines at a level crossing here in Grimsby. It's a bit of a bleak time of year, January, isn't it?
I think so, and it is, clearly, your heart has got to go out to the friends and relatives of those people who've been affected by these tragedies. But I think the important thing that I heard earlier last week is that in America there's been quite a lot of research done. A health authority in one of the states of America has worked very closely with those people who, unfortunately, historically will have tried to try to commit suicide. And what they've managed to do is come up with a new scheme, a new process of intervening at a much earlier stage to give these people a lot more hope. I mean, suicide is a terrible disaster, and it has wide-ranging effects. Even only a couple of nights ago, I was driving over the Humber Bridge, and I think another incident had occurred which delayed the traffic. Very tragic. We can only hope that this type of development that the NHS apparently are looking to get involved with will make it a lot better and reduce this type of tragedy. But yes, across the region we've been very seriously affected by it recently.
There's a point where despair becomes a medical condition, and if it's a medical condition it can be treated.
No, absolutely. I think there's a lot to be positive about in terms of what's going on in the industry and economics locally, but that's going to be driven down to a local and personal level. And the NHS, industry, education, schools and universities and colleges have a role to play in identifying those that might need a bit more assistance.
A much more cheerful NHS story, a medical story here. Have a go hero, life saved by angel nurse.
Yes, indeed. Well, I was very pleased to see that Polly, who I don't know, but looks like she's done a fantastic job, and it's important to see that somebody from Grimsby has gone down to London and has showed that the Northern...
this is a Grimberian nurse who saved somebody's life just by being skillful.
Absolutely, and I think, as you touched on earlier about the airport, that sometimes everything seems to be sort of southeast focused, and there's clearly, in the north we know what we're doing. And what's also important, however, is on the next page there's a piece where again the nurse is also talking about the importance of defibrillators across the region. We have a couple at the airport. We know that there'll be some here as well, and across a lot of other places and offices and buildings across Grimsby and the Humber region. But more need to be put out. It's a fantastic life-saving tool.
This lady said that she was just doing her job. Very modest of her. Must be very satisfying if just doing her job involves saving people's lives.
Absolutely, yes, very much so.
In the same edition here, there's another story, a Grimsby story as well. Jeremy Kyle has been the television presenter of programmes about unfortunate people, is worried about being attacked by drunks on the streets of Grimsby.
Well, I think there may be a discussion that might not in itself be a terrible thing to have taken place, but nonetheless, I think the important thing to note is that it talks about responsibility of teenagers and young adults going out and getting drunk. And recently there's been all this furore about accident and emergency. 450,000 more people being in, I think, over the last month or so.
And Jeremy Kyle's choice of company, I suppose.
Yes, possibly a challenge.
We'll have to stop there for a moment, Paul. Thank you. Now that's the sound of the men working on the chain gang. It's Where's the Mayor? This week with Paul McGrath, Mayor of Beverley.
That evening I'm attending a public meeting at Walkington. That's open. It's an open agenda. There's a lot of things relating. In particular, I think it will really the fracking issue that's been ongoing at Crowbury Hill, which is just on the outskirts of Beverley over the last few months. And given that the protesters who were camped there were evicted yesterday, that might be quite a contentious hot topic. Saturday, I have been invited to a Burns night supper where I will be doing the toast to the lassies, which is a traditional Burns night supper. So that will take up all of Saturday, and then on Sunday I've got a relatively quiet day, but then it's back to the same sort of routine for the following week. A number of events lined up that do take up both my time and the deputy mayor's time. So yeah, it does keep it quite busy, and trying to balance that with quite a busy work life. It can be a little bit challenging at times, but fortunately I've got a deputy mayor who's more than willing and able to step in.
I'm still with Paul Litton here to have a look at the local papers. Paul, rather exhausting looking story in the Bridlington Free Press and in the Driffield Times and Post. The Tour de Yorkshire.
Fantastic. France comes to Yorkshire. I think it's a great news story following on from the Tour de France that started in the Yorkshire region last year and the success and the amount of money and prestige it brought to the region. We appear to have got our act together and we're starting, and it looks like we're starting in Bridlington, so fantastic news.
There's some wonderful place names they've been using here. The Côte de Bridlington, I think, was one
Yes,
of the,
I'd not seen that one before, and the Côte du Briggs Watch and the Côte de Robin Hood's Bay, which is, yes, indeed.
So what does this, I mean, this is a wonderful sporting event. It's not something I'd want to do because I'd prefer to take a taxi. But what's the economic impact of an event like this in the region?
Well, and I will be shot down for this, I'm sure, but I believe that there was almost £100 million worth of investment came into the Yorkshire region last year. Now, this is very important because not everybody's going to be staying in Bridlington. There's going to be people flying in, hopefully into our airport. There's going to be people coming in by ferry. They're going to be spending money locally. They're going to be staying in hotels. They're going to come and visit the Yorkshire region, potentially for the first time in their lives. And it's a great opportunity to shout about the region, to show other people how positive it is. And of course, with the 2017 upcoming whole City of Culture opportunity about to start, gives a great opportunity for businesses locally to promote themselves and get people to come back.
Next story here, another a slightly more confusing economic story, business story.
Indeed.
Is the tide is turning as supermarket giant takes over factory site. Now, this is a story about Morrison's.
Yes, indeed.
Which is expanding here in Grimsby. And other supermarkets have been shrinking. We've seen in recent weeks the news that Tesco's is not going to be opening up as many new stores as it's thought, including not opening one in Immingham, which everybody had been looking forward to so much. What's going on?
Well, very interesting, isn't it? I think the introduction of Aldi and Lidl and other sort of discount supermarkets has made some of the investment decisions by some of the big players such as Morrison's, Tesco's and Sainsbury's, they've made them review very seriously what they're doing. I mean, we've also seen as well Morrison's have made an announcement on the North Bank to come out of one of their current sites, which is a real shame for the local population. I think there's some more pain to come in that sector. I think the way that we buy food, as opposed to going for a one large weekly shop, we're very much more into the convenience type of shopping, as I understand it. Though thankfully I don't have to do much of the shopping myself, otherwise, you know, I buy all of the wrong things.
Well, I do, and I just go to the markets. I mean, not the supermarkets. There are markets in where I live in Grimsby, and there are markets in Freeman Street. There's a market and a covered market at Freshley Place, and you get fantastic food, wonderful food, probably locally produced. Maybe that's the future for shopping.
Absolutely.
From a consumer's point of view.
No, indeed. I think there's quite a lot of authenticity now with farmers markets, etc., that people are looking for something that they can really feel that they can talk to and see the people who are actually making the food. There is a challenge, there's a change. It's very cyclical. If we go back to what was happening in the 60s, supermarkets at that point didn't really exist in the way that we've all come to know them over the last sort of 10 or 15 years. And now, to a certain extent, they're losing, sort of the flavour of the month, as it were, and people are beginning to buy their food in different ways. I'm not involved in that marketplace, but you know, it looks like it's going to be fairly hard work for some of the big supermarket chains over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Another
consumer affairs story in a way. Illegal haul of 16,360 cigarettes found in secret compartments at a shop in Scunthorpe. Now, why would... well done to the sniffer dog for finding them. I hope the sniffer dog is healthy and is getting over his 20-a-day habit. But reason it's worthwhile smuggling cigarettes is because they're so heavily taxed, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things that over the last sort of 30 or 40 years, the public's view of cigarettes and smoking has changed quite considerably. In the last sort of 48 hours, the government have announced as well that they're planning to bring forward legislation before the election to introduce advert-free packaging in terms of removing brand names. And I was listening this morning to a number of different people from both the pro-smoking and the anti-smoking lobby having a good go with each other on Radio 4 and other radio programmes. There's quite a big debate going on. I mean, it could be seen tongue-in-cheek that the individual responsible for this hoard decided that they wanted to purchase as many of the branded items before they suddenly became plain packaging.
What, as a collector of pretty labels, as it were?
Potentially, but I do read that perhaps Customs and Excise and Trading Standards took a slightly different view. So to that extent, and another serious point as well, is that whilst it's not specific here, importing cigarettes from unknown sources or buying them on the black market, you don't necessarily get what you're you think you're buying. And I would always suggest to people, whatever they buy, they go to a proper retailer that is actually selling the right products, because counterfeit cigarettes and counterfeit medicines are becoming quite a big issue now.
Do you have a problem with people smuggling cigarettes in through the airport?
Very little. I would say that the UK Border Agency and the sniffer dogs that we have in place, the security regulations, it is not a wise or clever thing to do. And we would always suggest to people that there are allowances. Buy what you're able to buy, bring it in if you want to, or buy in the duty-free shops. But it's not a clever idea to bring stuff in that you shouldn't be doing.
You suggested that people were advocating were pro-smoking. I don't think anybody's a pro-smoker. It's just the right to smoke rather than the actual activity.
Indeed, and I accept that correction.
Without being taxed too heavily. Paul, we must stop there for a moment because we must go over to Dan Kemp with all the sport.
Now for the sport, Grimsby travelled to Nuneaton hoping to put their FA Trophy disappointment against Gateshead behind them. They've won on their last 2 visits, so should be playing with confidence, especially after beating leaders Barnet 3-1 last weekend. North Ferriby United are in FA Trophy third round action at lowly Conference Southside Farnborough as the villagers look to continue their cup run and get another step closer to the final at Wembley. In rugby, Hull FC travel to Wakefield to face the Trinity Wildcats in the final pre-season fixture for coach Lee Radford's side. The two teams drew 2020 when they met in June. They start the new Super League season at Huddersfield Giants on Sunday the 8th of February. Meanwhile, Hull KR conclude their pre-season at Warrington Wolves. The Robins beat the Wolves 25-12 in April, so hoping to repeat that form. They kick off their new campaign at home to Leeds Rhinos, also on February the 8th. In National League 2, North Hull Ionians in second host Amt Hill and District, the current leaders, at Brantingham Park in what should be an exciting match. The Eyes are just 1 point behind and also a game in hand after last week's postponement against Stockport. Elsewhere in the division, Hull RUFC travelled to Stourbridge looking to gain points to beat relegation. And finally in ice hockey, Hull Stingrays face the Cardiff Devils, who narrowly beat them 3-2 at the beginning of the month. On Sunday they head north to Scotland where they face Edinburgh Capitals. That's all from the sport.
And you'll have noticed that wasn't Dan Kemp, that was James Dunn. My apologies for both. That's all we have time for this time, I'm afraid. If you've a story, go to our Facebook or Twitter pages, details on the screen, email news@estuary.tv or phone Grimsby 315561. Until next week, good evening.
Hello and welcome to Estuary TV's weather. Bright and breezy with plenty of sunshine and continuing small chance of isolated wintry showers on Saturday, maximum temperature of 6 degrees. Milder Sunday but cloudy and breezy with patchy rain.